Hello. I'm very thankful for doing this workshop with kind of the title Stories of Church Planting in Contemporary Europe. And thankful to being a part of dynamic gospel in a new Europe with the Lausanne movement. My name is Øivind Augland. I'm the leader of M4 in Europe and co-leading also Exponential Europe. At the same time, I'm a local pastor working in a local church. And I just want to start to share you my story when it comes to church planting. Because my story started in Norway, in the city of Kristiansand. That is the southernmost city of Norway. And I grew up in an environment where church planting was in some way natural. Well, the Evangelical Lutheran Church that I belongs to planted a lot of churches around in the area long time ago. But in the 70s, 80s and 90s, they started to plant churches in our city. And one of the churches in 1997, I come to faith in that church. And I grew up in that church and become a pastor in the church. And then was sent to another place in the neighborhood, 24 years old, to plant a new church, together with my wife, newly married. And when I was 29, I found out maybe I'm not really a pastor, maybe I'm more a church planter. And then we moved to another suburb and we planted another church. And I really believe that it's possible for a young generation, if you are 20 or late teenage or beginning of the 20s, to really mobilize and be a part of starting something new. I had the privilege to be a part of starting a new church when I was in the beginning of the 20s. And we planted these churches and become like 2,000 plus people that we are in some way frequently a part of the church in our city. But it didn't stop. You know, the Free Evangelical Church or the Mission Covenant Church, they also started to plant 12 years ago. And they planted around 10 churches in our city. And today, around 1,800 people before the COVID was a part of their Sunday service. And they, in some way, reached out to 3,000 plus people on an average in a week. Wow. Why? What would have happened if it only was these two mother churches in the center of the city? So when the city grew, they moved out to every suburb through planting new churches. Think of how much happened through that. Because in reality, today, 4 to 5% of the whole population are frequently active in one of these two denominations in our city. What would happen if we didn't plant the churches and multiply the gospel, disciples and leaders and new churches in our networks in the city of Kristiansand? We have an example of some other denomination who didn't plant, who are still small, but they didn't have a vision of planting and saturate the city with new churches. Well, today in our city, we have around 7% before COVID. 7% of the city was on a given Sunday in one of the congregation in our city. Totally, it's around 8,000 people. And 18%, or around 18,000 people, 19,000 people, was in some way during month active in one of our churches. Would that happen if not church planting had happened in the city? Honestly, I don't believe. And this is the local story that I grew up in some way, an environment when multiplication and church planting was natural in our denomination and later in the Evangelical Free Church. You know, but we have a story in our nation. From 1995 to 2014 in Norway, we had something called kind of a national church planting process with all denominations working together. It was a unity in a mission with a clear purpose. And during that time, we saw that around 350 to 400 new churches, congregations, were started in Norway. The decline of the church stopped, and around 20 to 25% of all the more active members in the church are a part of the new churches today. Wow. And then we had a process called Send Norway, and we put some statement together that we want to really, with the next 10 years, towards 2025, plant 400 new multiplying churches, and also train 4,000 church planters and leaders, and remain true to the Word of God as really the only foundation for doing discipleship in our nation. That's the Norwegian process. And we had that long process for many years in Norway. And it became what we call NC2P, or National Church Planting Process, that also went to other nations of Europe. Because the reality is that that unified mission become a national church planting process. It was developed some also system of church planting. So both the NC2P and the M4 process, where we have seen 400 new churches planted the last 10 years around in Europe, was birthed out of this unity in mission process of Norway. And that brings hope. And I really want to just to listen to different stories from church planters in Europe that are ignited by a vision. And I will tell you a little bit of what I believe God is speaking to Europe after you have seen this story from church planters all around Europe.
Hello, I'm Clara Martinez, and I'm part of a church planter team here in a small town close to Barcelona in Spain.
My name is Dimitri.
My name is Leszek.
Hi, my name is Hi,
my name is Thomas, and I'm a church planter here in beautiful Tallinn, Estonia. My dream for Tallinn is to see new church plants all over the place, because we don't have too many churches in this city.
We want to see disciples make disciples. We want to see churches planted all around this area of Cumbria.
We want to see our church do impact in our city, in our region, and want, of course, also to start new churches.
My dream is to see how people get connected with the unconditional love of Jesus Christ.
My dream is, and that's the reason why I founded together with my wife this church, is that the people living here, and they have everything. Almost everybody has the lake view from their houses. They have a car, they have a boat on the ship, on the sea. Realize that Jesus is the most precious thing.
Our dream is that one day we'll see the church full of our friends, our family who still don't know Jesus, and the friends of our friends, and the family of our family, and the family of our friends.
My dream for Fitjar is that every one of the 3,000 people that live here shall get to hear the gospel and get the chance to say yes to Jesus.
Our dreams, we don't want to have one big large church here. We desire to open up other churches.
One of my dreams, and it's a dream of the whole group as well, that we also establish churches around within this place.
But I hope this was encouraging for you, and we just pray that you would continue to take small steps in faith and see what God does through that. Bless you. Bye.
What was God telling you when you looked at this video and the story of these people planting churches around in Europe? What is God speaking to you? You know, young man and woman with a passion for Christ, to give the gospel to new people. I remember I was in Czech. Through the M4, we have seen around 50 new churches planted in Czech the last years. And I remember some years ago I was on a conference on the topic of innovation, and I met a lot of leaders and I talked about church planting. And I said to them, well, to plant a church in a European context is in some way give yourself to that context and die. Because it takes 5 to 7 years to get a healthy church off the ground in most of the places, because church planting in Europe, and that's what these people experience, it's mission. It's about giving yourself to other people, sharing the gospel, and disciple people. And when you disciple people, it becomes a church, a community of faith that be a light and a soul in that society where people can see and feel and experience Christ's presence through these people where they are. And that's our dream to see. And some of the fuel, and that fuels me, is a word that God spoke from 1 Samuel chapter 14. And it's about a young guy called Jonathan. And Jonathan was together with Saul in the cave because the Israelitic people was withdrawn, afraid, and they was hiding themselves in the cave for the big enemy, Philistine. In that situation, Jonathan, a young guy, started to think, is this really what we are up to? Is this really God's plan? Can God have another story of this situation? And then he went out of the cave together with his armor bearer, and he said this word, perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Perhaps there is another story. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. And what's happened? Well, Jonathan and his armor bearer went out of the cave into the front of the forepost of the Philistine. They deal with God, and God gave them a huge victory. God came down. The power of God became visible, touchable, reachable. And the rumor of that, what God was doing, came back to the cave. And the people in the cave went out and started to fight together with Jonathan. And even the people that was assimilated into the Philistine people came over and started to fight together with the Israelitic army. And they won one of the biggest victory in the whole history. Why? Because one young man, Jonathan, together with his armor bearer, asked, could there be another story? Maybe the Lord will act in our behalf, and nothing can hinder God. Whether you are few or many, doesn't matter. And in some way, this has been my passion, because I believe God is raising up thousands of a young generation to build the new church and the new church community in Europe, to reach their own generation. And for me and my generation, 50 plus, I'm there to cover and release them to move with God has spoken to them. Perhaps the Lord will act on their behalf to the young generation. And I believe this is happening. You know, to my surprise, I saw that we had in M4 100 team in training this September 2021 in 10 different nations of Europe. And you know, it was like 19 teams in Siberia and the south of Russia. It was 12 teams. There was a lot of young people training in Ukraine. It was 15 teams in the German-speaking Switzerland and French-speaking Switzerland. It was 10 teams in Czech Republic. And one of the team was the first deaf church for deaf people that was trained to reach that kind of context in Czech Republic. there was 30 teams in training in Scandinavia, in Finland and Sweden and Norway, and 12 teams in England, and I could continue. I believe God wants to act on your behalf. Yes, we know that the Church of Europe is diverse. And we know that it consists of 4 main blocks of Europe. You have the Catholic South, you have the Protestant North, you have the Orthodox East, and you have a little bit the mixed Balkan. And we know there are challenges to plant churches and different challenges in the different context of Europe. And honestly, I'll just go back again. We know that the church has declined in Europe for many years. The last 50 years after the Second World War, the church started to decline and traditional church started to decline. But there are something new happening. And again, I want to say, perhaps the Lord will act on your and my behalf. Maybe He, in this time, after the COVID time or in the end of the COVID time, has a new vision for Europe. And I want to give you some signposts in church planting that I think is significant. So the first one is that we are moving from the Western to the global Christianity. And I think all of you know, yes, this is true. When we were together at our exponential conference in Berlin, Germany, in October, mid-October 2021, 1 month ago, we felt God was speaking to us and said, well, the European church needs to look to East to prepare for persecution and more challenging time. But at the same time, they need to give away to West, to the US, and the US need to look to Europe to see how you handle Christianity in a post-Christian, secularized society. You know, we need to start to look to each other and to learn from each other, from the continent to the continent. And we as a European church, I believe, we have so much to learn from the Eastern church. And we need to prepare for a time where it's not that easy to live out an evangelical, born-again, wholehearted Christian life and ethic in our place and in our time. But God has something He will do through that. And then we were, another 9th signpost is from membership to discipleship. I really believe it's all about discipleship. And it needs to find that way in Europe. And the 10th one is from addition to multiplication. And in some way, that's some of my really passion. We need to see in the Western church that reproduction and multiplication are becoming the norm in the language and the behavior of the church. We talk about multiplying the gospel, multiplying disciples and multiplying leaders, multiplying churches and multiplying networks of churches all around in Europe. That is the only way we really can reach Europe. And I believe it's possible. And going back to the story of Jonathan, you know, God spoke to Jonathan and said, perhaps, and he said, perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether it's by few or many. I want to just take that word into your life and embrace it and say, maybe God will act on your behalf, in your place, and nothing is impossible, and nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, for doing miracle in your place, because God loves our continent, and God will act on your behalf. Thank you for giving me the time to share. And I just want to encourage you to say that God is doing something new in Europe. It's about church planting. It's really about multiplication and reproduction of churches all around in our continent. Thank you and bless you.
Good afternoon, my name is Jiří Unger. I'm a leader of M4 church planting training in the Czech Republic. I live in Prague, in Czech Republic. I'm a member of a new church at Prague 13, and also a member of the church planting team that now plants church and in another suburb of Prague, mostly for people who commute to Prague. So I'm part of that church planting experiment. Thank you also, Øivind, for sharing your stories from Europe and big picture. I think it's encouraging to see how God is actually working across different European nations. I remember Øivind coming 10 years ago to Czech Republic, sharing stories from Norway, and how encouraging it was for us to see what God is doing. And from that time we started M4 and had a privilege to walk alongside 38 church planting teams, which is amazing story for us, because we have about 0.3% of evangelical Christians out of 10 million people in the Czech Republic. So it's hugely encouraging that actually church planting became, over the last 10 years, became more normal thing for churches and for denominations than it used to be. I think Øivind shared some of the big picture stories from Europe. I was asked to share some practical lessons that we learned in church planting in Central and Eastern Europe. So here are maybe 10 lessons that I will share. There are many more, but we have only limited time, and definitely we will have time for discussion and your questions. So first point, plant Christ and his kingdom first, and church will emerge. I think it's quite important to allow God to be agent of your church plant. Otherwise you can lose the life that is at the core of church planting. So it's not just about our activities, about programs and about other things, but actually, is God planting his church? Is he at the core of why we plant church? And is it life-giving or life-sucking process, church planting itself? So we are not called just to make people workers and do activities and do stuff, but actually making them disciples of Jesus Christ. That actually means really learning from living Christ how to live our lives as he would live our lives if he were us. So it's the depths of life and of God that really makes any church plant attractional, at least for me. Second point that we learned, that there is no one model of a church plant that would fit all situations. Sometimes I see the trainings in church planting just prefer one model as the model of church planting. There is nothing like that in Europe. You need multiple solutions, models for different situations, for urban setting, for villages, for big cities, for different target groups or people or different subcultures in your country, which it's always a mixture of vision and dreams of a church planter, of his team, and their gifts of the place where they plant churches. So it means also that your training need to be very flexible in solutions and in contextualization of what does it mean in their place. So create environments when church planting teams can get inspired by different models, by different solutions, and let them adapt it to their situation, and create spaces where spaces of encouragement and learning and mutual learning, because that seems to be very important in European context. Third point, start with a team that is as strong as possible. We see it as a common weakness in most church plants that they are not investing enough in recruiting strong enough teams at the beginning. Sometimes it's a first test for a church planter if he is really the called guy, if nobody really follows him, if nobody really wants to go alongside him into a new project, probably there could be a problem. So encourage church planters, and we do that. We encourage church planters to gather as many people as possible, to dream big about who they would like to ask to join them. Very often they are surprised that there are already people in their churches who waited for a challenge like that for a long time, but nobody asked them. So encourage church planters to be bold and start strong. We encourage them to start at least with 20 people, especially in urban settings. Of course, in village and countryside, it can be different. It can be different, but there is something about the number 20, like sociologically, that helps to like step up from a small group dynamic to a more stable community that also others believe that it's stable enough that they can join. Fourth lesson: don't overemphasize the importance of the Sunday worship service. We see it as a common mistake in many church plants that they start Sunday services or weekly Sunday services too soon before they reach a certain number, and they spend most of their energy, maybe 50% of their energy, on just preparing and doing stuff related to Sunday services. I don't think that Sunday services are not important. Some models, especially attractional models of church planting, require quite a lot of energy put into Sundays, and that's absolutely fine. But if it takes all the energy that people have actually to be missional, to be with non-believers, even to be with each other, it can be a major obstacle. And also ask if the worship service really makes disciples to Jesus Christ. How do you know that? Or do you build mostly consumer-oriented church? That's always a challenge. Fifth point: planting in Europe takes time. From our experience, it takes 5 to 7 years to plant a fully established and sustainable church. What does it mean? Actually, it has implications for the church planter. There needs to be clarity in calling and commitment for the church planting leader or church planting couple. It takes time, so that they are aware of that. Also, it requires commitment and time and energy commitment from the core team, and understanding that it's normal. Yeah, very often people expect huge results very quickly, but they don't come, and they get frustrated, disappointed. So just be clear that it has its own pace. That of course some church plants grow very quickly, some don't. But commitment is key, and being realistic about that, I think, is also important. Sixth point: be careful when time spent in the harvest field is more a strategy than it is a lifestyle for the church planter or for the church planting team. If the church planter has less than 50 people, non-believers, in his relational network, it's not healthy. Of course, if you move to a new place, that takes time. But if you as a church planter if you don't have friends, if it's not natural for you to have friends among non-believers, and you spend most of your energy with believers or just with programs and mission activities, which is fine, but you don't share your life and you are not on the harvest with your life, I think that can be difficult because you don't model it to your team. And if it lacks missional behavior, really sharing lives with non-believers, it can be a serious obstacle. Seventh point that we learned is about, especially in Central Eastern Europe, where church was heavily dependent, or its generosity culture was destroyed under communism. We had to learn and we had to teach also church planters how to create a culture of financial sustainability and generosity from the start of their church plant. So we encourage church planters to model it themselves, like being generous, grow in generosity themselves, but also from the start be key that this is a value in their church plant and in their core team to do that. Especially the leaders and the core team should give to the church plant and make it sustainable, not rely just on support from outside, that it can be helpful, but churches struggle later when there is no healthy culture of financial sustainability and giving. So teach also that. I think that's helpful. And also we encourage churches maybe to give 10% of their income for the future church planting. Maybe investing in another church plant or another leader. So consider that idea. 8th lesson: avoid loneliness. I saw many church planters who were lonely rangers, parachute church planters who were just sent somewhere as a couple, and it took ages for them to grow to a small group, and slowly they became disencouraged, let's say, or discouraged. Church planting is exciting ministry with a lot of adventure, changes, things that you can try new, but sometimes it brings also disappointment and struggles. So having supporting relationships and structures around the church planting leader or church planting couple is a huge advantage. We see that Good Mother Church can be a great help in this. But also like having coach or a mentor who can help church planter and church planting projects to stay on track, who can help with basic accountability, can be a huge help, because easily there are so many things happening in life, easily you can drift away from your main calling and main focus. So avoid loneliness. 9th point, on the larger scale, invest in the next generation of church planters. We see that it takes time to prepare church planters. They just don't fall from heaven. The best environment for raising new church planters are good mother churches, who have intentional plan to plant more and healthy churches, and actually have a pipeline or leadership pipeline that can generate new leaders. So create places where people who have a vision for church planting can see what's the next step that they can make. Share stories, make these points of contacts for these potential church planters. Very often we see a great potential in younger people between 28 to 35 years old who had successful secular careers. They proved that they have good working habits, they can do stuff, but at the same time kept desire to serve in church. So create environment for these people, and sometimes it means challenging them. Yeah, this is something that you could consider. So, and also very often these people are able to work part-time in their secular job, or have enough resources for their church plant to do bivocational church planting, which is I think quite typical model now in Europe, as we don't have enough resources to plant churches with fully paid church planters. Last point, 10th point, my observation that denominational support makes a huge difference in Europe. Where there is a climate of support and vision for church planting, it creates space for innovation, for courage, and it attracts new leaders, and especially young people. So if you are a leader of denomination, or if you are a leader of church planting department in your denomination, it's hugely important. There is no denomination that would grow in Europe without a healthy church planting project or strategy. So changing the discourse about church planting in denomination releases potential and makes it much easier for church planters to try new things. We see several cases of denominations who don't have structures well adapted for church planting, and it's killing innovation. It's killing their church planting projects, because it's very difficult for church planters to actually survive in environments that are hostile to church planting as an idea. But when you succeed in creating space where it's normal, it's something that is integral part of our strategy, of our thinking, there are people you can turn to, you have models, you have examples of church plants in your denomination, and the path is a little bit more clear for church planters. It's a real help. So these were my 10 observations, and I'm looking forward to our discussion and your questions.